Hi and welcome, Mindsetters. We're busy looking at strategies for reproduction. And just to break that down before we actually get into the nitty-gritty of it, the word strategies shouldn't be a hard word for you, grade 12s. Strategies, to strategize, to plan, to make something easy. That's what we are talking about. So in terms of that, strategies for reproduction, that would mean we're making plans to facilitate reproduction. This plan that we are talking about has many facets. It starts about dealing with fertilization, how fertilization takes place. Thereafter, how the embryo develops. And thereafter, when this embryo is fully formed and it's given birth to or it hatches, what happens thereafter? Those are the focus areas that we need to look at. So fertilization, thereafter the care of the embryo, and thereafter the development and care of the young. This is what we're looking at. Our key focus would be external and internal fertilization. Like I said, fertilization first. Thereafter, we look at the development of the embryo. Is it oviparous, ovoviviparous, or viviparous? Thereafter, we look at the egg, and a specific type of egg, the amniotic egg. There we need to label and draw the diagram, and we need to look at the advantages and disadvantages. Once the egg hatches or the young are given birth to, we look at the development. Is it precocial or altricial? And what degree of parental care do these young receive from their parents? This is basically it. As you can see, guys, most of this you would have covered already in primary school. It's just here now we're going into more detail of the actual processes and the advantages and disadvantages to the organisms. If we're looking at reproduction, you would have learned in grade 10 and 11 already that we have two main types of reproduction. And the first one is asexual reproduction, and the other one is sexual reproduction. During asexual, now let's just go back to English a little bit here, and life science. When in life science we're dealing with this letter A as a prefix to a word, generally this means non. So if we have sexual and we add to that the A as a prefix, asexual, sexual reproduction refers to reproduction where gametes are exchanged. And asexual reproduction would be that type of reproduction where gametes are not exchanged. So going back to that, so we're talking of a formation of a new organism from a single parent. There's no need for exchange of gametes, so you don't need two parents. By means of mitosis, cell division, which you learned about in grade 10, ordinary cell division. In your grade 12 year, by now you would have learned about meiosis. So the new organism is a clone of the parent. Now this word clone would mean a copy of the parent. So in terms of DNA, in terms of genetic material or makeup, the new organism is a replica of the original organism. So in other words, if I were to have undergone asexual reproduction, if I had a child coming out of me or an offspring coming out of me, that offspring would look exactly like me. Not a bad idea, I think, but nonetheless. Sexual reproduction is the formation of a diploid zygote by means of fusion, joining of haploid male and female gametes. Now, none of these words are new to you. Haploid, gametes, sex cells, and obviously when these two fuse, haploid fuses with haploid, we get a diploid zygote forming there. And this diploid zygote then undergoes mitosis to multiply the number of cells it has and to grow. And that's how we get the new organisms from that. Again, we said strategies are put into place to ensure that any reproduction is successful in terms of its purpose. What do we mean? Why did we add that brackets there in terms of its purpose? The purpose of reproduction is to ensure survival of the species. Organisms reproduce to create offspring that will ensure that that particular species will continue surviving. The minute reproduction doesn't take place or reproduction is slowed down, then the chances of these organisms surviving is less. And the strategies that we are talking about are no strangers to you. Where females are putting makeup on, generally, some may disagree with me, but generally, the purpose of putting this makeup is actually a reproductive strategy. Maybe not true to its purpose, but to get close to that. And we don't want to be gender biased in our approach, so we go to the males as well. When the males are using the deodorant and the rest of it, and you've seen the adverts in terms of deodorant and the makeup and perfume for ladies, you would always see that they use the adverts showing the effect of this particular makeup or deodorant or perfume in its powerful attraction of the opposite sex. So that's what we are talking about. So here we go. Even humans use a variety of strategies to attract the opposite sex. Maybe not for the actual purpose of reproduction, but nonetheless. Moving on, fertilization. First of all, what is fertilization? We spoke about earlier that during sexual reproduction, the male and female gametes fuse. This is fertilization. Simple. Fertilization refers to the fusion of male and female sex cells, sperm and egg in our case, to form a diploid zygote. Now, we have to look at internal and external. Again, this can't be too difficult for you because internal, inside. External, outside. Those are the key words that you need to master to understand what we are saying here. Very simple. First of all, in internal, the sperm cell from the male is deposited into the female by the process of copulation. That is when the male inserts his sexual organ into the female's body during sexual intercourse. And in this way, when this is done for fertilization, then obviously the sperm are deposited into the female's body. So the sperm cells then fuse with the egg cell inside the body of the female. Internal fertilization, and our big word was inside. Where inside? The female's body. Examples of this are mainly terrestrial mammals, all the mammals that live on land, most of them, birds, and many insects as well. So you and I also, we display internal fertilization. What are the advantages of this? Firstly, there's a higher degree or a higher degree of a chance of the sperm cell coming into contact with the egg. Because it's inside the body, the sperms are deposited into the female reproductive organs. And within that area, where the sperm is highly likely to meet the egg somewhere. So there's a greater chance. Secondly, because it's taking place inside the body, the gametes are protected from predators, and the resultant zygote is protected because it's kept inside the body. And therefore, it's also removed from harsh environments, cold, snow, drought, etc., flooding. All these things will not affect this organism because the diploid embryo is inside the mother's body. The disadvantages is because fertilization is taking place inside the body, the embryo will develop inside the body, and the female cannot bear so many embryos at the same time. So fewer eggs are produced. But you notice that the advantage and the disadvantage in this side are offsets of each other. Fewer eggs are produced on the one end as a disadvantage. But at the same time, the eggs are protected inside the body, so there's a greater chance of that egg reaching the stage of hatching or being born and developing. So there's a bit of a trade-off there. Also, the animal must have a specialized organ. The male must have a specialized organ to insert the sperm cells where? Into the female body. An example of internal fertilization, or copulation in this case, is where the tortoise male is mounting the female and the sperms will be deposited into her body and fertilization may take place. Remember, it doesn't mean that when copulation takes place, that fertilization will take place. If that's the case, then every time copulation takes place in a marriage, then the woman will fall pregnant. That's not the case. Okay? So remember that. On the other hand, we have external fertilization. Here, obviously, the sperm cell fuses with the egg cell outside the body of the female. In other words, in the environment. And this environment must have fluid, because sperms can't fly in the air and fuse with the eggs. They must be in a watery medium so that the sperms can swim towards the egg and fertilize the egg. But now already you know that this is happening outside the environment, outside the organism. So there's no control of this. So think about that, and I'll show you something just now. Okay. So the sperm cells are discharged or released directly into the water, and the eggs are also discharged into the water, and perchance they may meet and fertilization will take place. Examples: most aquatic animals like frogs, sponges, jellyfish, worms, and some fish as well. Not all fish display external fertilization. Some fish, like the tropical guppies that you may keep in your little fish tank, they display internal fertilization. And believe it or not, the male fish have a specialized structure to deposit sperm into the female's cloaca. You would have learned something about that in grade 11. Advantages: there's no additional energy required, because this organism is not growing inside the female's body. It's all happening outside. So there's no need for expended energy. There's no need for a male to have a special organ. For example, in the fish that have external fertilization, the male does not have a special organ. So through the cloaca, the eggs come out from the female, and through the cloaca, the sperm will come out from the male, and fertilization can take place in the water. Chances of fertilization can be enhanced by courtship display by fish. I wouldn't say that's a great advantage, because that's something the fish have to do in addition to what normal organisms do. And we said earlier, it does not need much energy. Disadvantage, and this will be the big, look at it now. I said I was going to show you something. From internal fertilization, the main advantage was there is some degree of certainty that there will be, the sperm and egg may meet. And immediately you use that advantage as a disadvantage for external. Why? Because in external fertilization, the chances are slim. The chances are very low of the eggs and the sperm meeting. Remember, they're in the water. The eggs can be deposited, and for some reason, the current takes that egg away, or those eggs. But remember, to overcome this problem, fish also have some intrinsic method of dealing with that. For example, they may lay many eggs. What does this do? It increases the chance of fertilization. There you have frogs, where the female frog is there, croaking by the water. The male mounts the female. The eggs are deposited in that area. The sperm is also deposited, and the sperm may fuse with the eggs, so fertilization will take place. Remember, another disadvantage would be that they are in the harsh environment. Another disadvantage would be that they are exposed to predators. Now let's look at those two things that I've given you, and look where it comes from. Look at the advantages of internal fertilization. Now this is where you need to strategize. Just like these organisms are strategizing for reproduction, you need to strategize for this, learning this. Because if you learn the advantages of internal fertilization, if you change them around, they become disadvantages for the external fertilization. So you don't have to learn both. And common sense, which is not so common anymore, must prevail. Good. Now, the first part, notice we spoke about the fusion. Now that fusion has taken place, now what must happen? There must be development. So of what? Of the embryo. So that's where we're talking about ovipary, ovovivipary, and viviparous. We will look at the opposite ends first, oviparous and viviparous, and then we will look at ovoviviparous in the end. So oviparity or oviparous refers to an organism that lays eggs, and the egg develops outside the body, does not occur inside the body. So an egg is laid after fertilization. An egg is laid. This egg incubates outside the body. Whether it's in the nest, whether it's in the ground, whether it's in the water, doesn't make a difference. As long as an egg is laid and the egg development of the embryo takes place outside the body, this is known as oviparous organisms. Eggs are usually protected by a hard shell. Others may be protected by a jelly layer-like layer after fertilization. Like the frog's eggs, they are protected by a jelly-like layer. Example, frogs, insects, birds, and marine mammals. Some fish may also be oviparous. Advantages? In some species, eggs are left, so no time wasted on parental care. In other words, the eggs are laid, they're left in the water, or they're left in the ground, like the locust deposits its eggs in the ground, and they go away. They don't come back to check whether these eggs are hatching or not. No time, no energy wasted on parental care. Now, coming from humans, using that as an advantage, it's harsh, isn't it? If I tell you, I don't want to waste time looking after my children. After they're born, we must just leave them out there. As I was driving to studio, I heard on the news that the mother is being charged for abandoning the baby. Now the police are investigating whether the baby is stillborn or was killed by the mother. Imagine these things happening, horrid things. Now, but look what we're talking about in the animal world now. We're saying that that's an advantage. Because those are animals, they do not have the faculty of reasoning that you and I should have. The humans are said to be the highest of the animal kingdom because of this faculty of judgment and reasoning, which we often tend to neglect. We need to think more about that. So once the egg is laid, the mother does not need to provide further resources until hatching. Have we spoken about that already? Mother does not have extra size or weight of pregnancy. In other words, this egg is not staying in her body, so her life carries on as normal. Whereas when internal fertilization takes place and the organism develops inside the body, it's not only for internal fertilization, because in the birds there is internal fertilization, but the egg does not develop inside the body. So it's not the same thing. So developing of eggs taking place inside the body, this is a burden to the mother. The mother is going to be, in humans for example, the mother gets unshapely, she's worried about her weight gain, she's got to go extra times to the toilet, she's got to eat more, etc., etc., etc. She can't do the things she could do before. Now, in humans, it's not such a big disadvantage because their life goes on as normal. But imagine an animal in the wild that is carrying an embryo or fetus inside its body. It slows this animal down tremendously in the wild. If it's being chased by a predator or it needs to hunt, it becomes very difficult. So in those cases, that's what you must think about there. It avoids the vulnerability of labor for the mother. Remember, when labor takes place, what is labor again from reproduction? Labor is that stage when the reproductive muscles of the uterus and the abdominal muscles are contracting and relaxing to push the baby out. So it's a time when the mother will be vulnerable. Imagine the mother is giving birth and there's a predator coming there. What can she do? She's vulnerable in that time, prone to any danger. So the egg laying is relatively quick and easy. Disadvantages: eggs cannot be moved or the egg itself can't run away to avoid predators. So the egg itself is vulnerable. If the egg is left unattended to, the predators come, they're going to eat the eggs. Okay? In some species, parents must protect and or incubate the eggs. Like in birds, the male and females take turns to incubate the eggs. So there is energy being used, and there is that degree of wasting time and energy. In some species, the young hatch small and are poorly developed, like the chicks. And in this case, they may be vulnerable to predators at that time or the environment. And the young must be strong enough to break the shell for hatching. If the young is not strong enough, it's not going to break the shell, it will die inside the egg. Some examples of oviparous organisms: birds and insects. Vivipary refers to another opposite end. Refers to animals that give birth to live young. So oviparous was egg laying and egg development outside the body. Viviparous, there's no real egg, and the young are born alive. That's the most important thing. The young are born alive, like us. There is a, and when this young is developing inside the body of the female, there is a connection between the developing fetus and the mother via an umbilical cord or other structures. Examples: human beings will be top of the list, whales, kangaroos. Advantages: well, human beings and most other mammals for that thing. Young are protected by the mother automatically. They're inside the body, so they have a free bodyguard. No need for protection. Okay? She's got to protect her own life, and by doing so, she's protecting them. There's no risk of separation from warmth. Food and oxygen are readily available. They're getting it from the mother. Young often born fairly well developed, unless they're born prematurely. In that case, obviously in humans, we can take care of them. In animals, it's a different story. And when they are born, they can even run away from danger if necessary. All the work of birth is done by the mother. No need to struggle to hatch. So the young don't have to do much work in this time. No, they don't have to do any work. Young benefit from parents' superior knowledge of food, all that, before and after birth. While they're in the mother's body, they're already getting some knowledge of what to do, when to do, how, and what have you. And after birth, they're going to be suckling from the mother. In other words, they would be drinking milk and getting fed by the mother, and they would watch what she does and learn from that experience. Disadvantage: because there's labor, there will be a risk for the mother, because she becomes ungainly and awkward, carrying extra weight. Other problem is, if the mother dies, the offspring will also die. Unless, of course, in humans, if this is happening, then they can have an emergency operation and the child may be removed, and if it is developed, well enough developed, it will be in an incubator for a while, and then the child can be fed, etc., and the child can carry on with life. But other than that, it can be a problem. The labor process can be lengthy, leaving the mother vulnerable. We spoke about that as a disadvantage, as an advantage of the oviparous organisms. It always involves some parental care after birth, so the parent have to give in some energy and time in this way. Mother must find extra food and water to support the fetus all the time. As she is growing, or as the fetus is growing inside her, she needs to eat more. Okay, some examples of viviparous organisms. You can see all the mammals there, including your cousin the monkey, and the giraffe, etc., and your best friend, the doggy dog. Ovovivipary now. So we looked at ovipary. Egg is laid, no connection between the egg and the mother, and the egg develops outside the body. Viviparous, the embryo develops inside the body. There is a connection, and the young is born alive. Now we're taking oviparous, the ovo, and we're taking the viviparous, ovovivipary, it should be, sorry, vivipary. Ovovivipary. So we're taking the vivi out of viviparous and the ovo out of oviparous and we're putting them together. So in other words, this is telling you that this one is in between somewhere. Where is this in between? They do not lay eggs immediately, but keep them in their bodies until they hatch. Actually, until just before they hatch. Let's understand what I've just corrected there. If we say until they hatch, that means they're hatching inside the body and then they're laying the eggs. That doesn't happen. Snakes, lizards, etc., they keep the egg inside the body until it's time to hatch. They lay the eggs, and as the eggs are laid, they hatch. So just before they hatch, they are laid. Because the body temperature is necessary for them to develop and hatch later. But there is no connection between the embryo and the mother. So again, in keeping to our theme, what we've been talking about, ovi, vivi, and ovo-vivi. Now here there is an egg. It's kept inside the body until it's ready to hatch, but there is no connection between the mother and the egg. Okay? Example, sharks, lizards, cockroaches, and some snakes. Notice, cockroach, by the way, is a type of an insect. So not all insects are oviparous, just like not all fish are oviparous or viviparous or ovo-viviparous anyway. Advantages: the young is protected from cold and predators to ensure survival, similar to viviparous. The young one can develop to a fairly large size before birth because it's kept inside the mother. There is some prenatal care for the infant, which is good for the child. No drain on the mother's resources because there's no connection between the embryo and the mother. The mother is not providing anything for this egg apart from keeping it inside its body. Disadvantage: if the mother dies, so will the offspring. Mother still has extra weight to deal with, just like in vivipary. Example are the snakes. You're having that. It's from the sharks. Then we look at now, we've completed now this development up to hatching. Now we're talking about the egg itself. And we're looking at what we call the amniotic egg. This is the egg that is laid by reptiles, birds, and some mammals. The embryo develops inside a membrane known as the amnion and is protected by many other membranes and a hard shell generally. Inside this amnion, this membrane, there's fluid. This fluid is called amniotic fluid. It serves to protect the embryo from drying out. Desiccation. A good word for drying out, one word, desiccation. It also acts as a shock absorber, so there's easy movement, so that's another function. It allows for free fetal movement, not movement of the feet, fetal, this one, fetal movement. The embryo gets food from the yolk. Inside this egg there's yolk, so the embryo gets food from that. There is another membrane surrounding a structure known as the allantois. The allantois stores all the metabolic wastes coming from the metabolism that the fetus undergoes. So all the waste products get stored in the allantois. The chorion is the third membrane now. It allows for the diffusion of oxygen, food and water to go into that. So in other words, oxygen, food and water. The food is already in the yolk. It will diffuse, and through that it will go into the chorion. From there it will diffuse into the egg. What are the advantages of having this amniotic egg? First of all, obviously, our first sentence said something about desiccation, so they are resistant to dryness. Oviparous oviparous mammals can move to other environments, to environments that they couldn't go to before. The egg itself is protected by a number of membranes, so there's a high degree of protection there. It can also allow animals to evolve into bigger forms and better protect themselves. And here's a view of the interior view of a bird's egg. If you look at it, you know this already. If you boil an egg and you cut that egg, if you cut the egg across, you'll see some of these structures, not all. You can obviously see the shell that has become soft there. And another structure in the middle that's very obvious is the yolk. And the yolk is held in place by these structures on the side, the gray ones, the chalaza. And notice that the embryo is like a little dot there. And that embryo is going to develop. Below the shell, there's a membrane known as the shell membrane. And the white of the egg inside is known as the albumen. Obviously, this white of the egg is after we boil or fry the egg, but normally this area here is transparent. And albumen is a protein, so there's some protein there and water in the albumen. This area here is the airspace, so it acts as a shock absorber when the egg is laid, so it doesn't break, gives it a bit of shock absorbing there. Notice the airspace is still there. Now we're taking this one a little later when the embryo is starting to develop. You can see this membrane here, the amnion, this one here, that one there, not the membrane but the space. This whole thing here is called the amnion around the embryo. The first membrane around is called the amnion. Then we have the allantois in this area here, allantois, let's call it the allantois. There's a bit of albumen there, the amniotic fluid is there, and the embryo is also in that area. I want you to have a look at that diagram again. You must be able to draw and label such a diagram. But again, this is not rocket science. You've done this already in what we would have called standard 4, grade 6 at least. You should have drawn an egg. And the egg is something that you can have a look at in your own homes as well. Before you're boiling, before you're scrambling the eggs, when you open the egg, have a look at this egg and look at the different structures that you can see. I want to leave you with one question for now. I want you to think about it. How come we don't see embryo when we open the egg, when we want to eat the egg? The eggs that we eat, how come we don't see any blood or any embryo? We don't see this ever when we open an egg. How come we can't see this? I give you a little time to think about that. Have a small break. Get some coffee, Milo, some juice, whatever you want to juice yourself up with. I'll meet you after the break and I'll see if you have figured that answer out. Hi Mindsetters and welcome back. I'm hoping you enjoyed your break and you did some soul searching in terms of what we asked you to think about, and that was whether, or rather why, we do not see this developing embryo or any sign of it in the eggs that we eat. Have you got an answer? I thought so. You should have got it by now. That is because the eggs that we eat are generally unfertilized eggs. So there's no zygote, therefore there's no developing embryo in those eggs. Those are unfertilized eggs, almost as though the birds were shooting blanks and they're giving us unfertilized eggs, and that is why we can eat those eggs. That's one. Another question I'd like to ask you, and this I just want you to think about. It's not a question that we're going to answer in this particular segment. When you do human reproduction, you must try and put these two things together. If we look at the bird's eggs and some other of these oviparous organisms, especially, we'll find that the allantois is a large structure. It's a large sac to store the waste products. And also we can see clearly it has a large yolk sac for the food as well. My question to you, just to think about, so that it's out there, when you do human reproduction, you need to compare. So the question is, how come the allantois and the yolk sac are reduced in the human fetus? So the human developing embryo, for that matter, has a very small yolk sac and allantois. Why are these structures reduced in those organisms? We're not going to answer that today. You would then look at human reproduction and then put the two together in the end. Now that the eggs are there, we've spoken about the egg, we went inside the egg, we spoke about how the egg develops, etc. Now we want to know, when this egg hatches, or when this organism hatches from the egg rather, I should say, and or is born, how does the organism develop further in that sense? And we look at two. One is precocial and one is altricial. I'm going to go to that one. Those are the two. Precocial, coming from the word precocious. If somebody tells you after you have behaved in a certain way towards them that you're very precocious, that's not a compliment, right? It's an insult. It would mean that you are forward. You have done something that you shouldn't have done, untoward. So in terms of this, that's not the case though. Although this meaning of forward comes out in this explanation of precocial. Precocial means that the young that are born or hatch are relatively mature and are able to move around after they're born or hatch. In other words, they are relatively independent. Notice we're using this word relatively to tell you that they're not totally independent, but they are relatively independent. They can do certain things on their own. So if they were left in a lurch, they would have a chance of survival. And we look further at them. Their eyes are generally open and they have a good eyesight. They also have a strong skeleton, and the body is either covered by feathers in birds or hair in mammals. Notice I skipped one bullet because I felt those two go together. Now we go back there. They can, because of these factors, the strong skeleton, the eyesight is good, they can go out and search for food on their own if they have to. Birds need their parents to keep them warm, but this lasts for a very short period for precocial birds. Mammals don't need their parents to keep them warm because they are homeothermic, or rather, we use the word these days, endotherms. They control their body temperature from within their bodies. This word endotherm you would come across in a chapter known as homeostasis later. Example of these precocial organisms are birds, cattle, sheep, antelopes, buffalo, elephants, hippos, and giraffe. There's some examples there. You see, the eyes are open and feathers. Here you won't be able to see, but the eyes are open there, and it has a body covering of hair already. Altricial would be the opposite. That means here the young are not independent at all. They are dependent. So they can't even move immediately after birth, and helpless. They are totally dependent on their parents. Does that remind you of somebody? Yep, it does. You and I were both helpless when we were born. We did not have eyesight. We couldn't see for a few days. We've had our skin, but very little hair covering, although most of us won't have much hair anyway after that. Some are born with lots of hair on the head, though. But we are totally dependent. We can't move. We are there. We start crying. We're waiting for mom to feed us or somebody to feed us, to put clothes on us, etc., etc., etc. So when you look at altricial, think about yourself as a human being that's born helpless. You can't do anything. And obviously then, precocial is the opposite to that. So if you learn altricial, which you can relate to yourself, precocial is the opposite to that. So they do not have feathers and are blind. They need to be fed and to be kept warm. Even us, although we are endotherms, we need to be kept relatively warm with the blankets and the rest of it. There you see the birds, blind, they don't have any body covering. Remember this, all this you're seeing here, let me take that color out. All right, so we're talking about that, and let's change the color to show you that this is the nest. This part is the nest, it's not a body covering. All this is part of the nest. And here's some organisms here also have the same situation there. 3 blind mice. Now that these organisms are born and the development is either altricial or precocial, now we need to look at what the parents do. What do the parents do for them? Parental care. So we are dealing with parental care. Parental care is either absent or present. This is the broad categories. But in terms of present, there's degrees of parental care as well. So we'll look at that. So first of all, parental care, what is it? No parental care. It's obvious. No contact with the offspring after eggs are laid. Left on their own, they must do their own thing. Care of laid eggs, this is now a degree of parental care. They guard and or incubate eggs till they hatch. And then they leave them sometimes. Or with this, you can also have care of the young. The young, after hatching birth, are taken care until they become independent. Now, in our case, we go there. Well, the guarding, there's no incubating of the eggs, but because we are embryos inside mom's tummy, not in the tummy, that would be totally incorrect. In the abdomen of the mom, in the uterus of the mother, we are there, we are protected, she's taking care of us, she's guarding us. She makes sure, hopefully, that she does not do anything to harm us. In most cases, that's what our moms do. They take extra care during the pregnancy that the child or the developing embryo goes through the full term of pregnancy and is born free of defects. And after we are born, they take care of us, they send us to school, they dress us, etc. And I'm 47, and if I go home for lunch, or rather when I go home for prayer during the afternoon, my mom, when she's at home, makes sure that I eat. So she's still looking after me. And how many times do we have to now and then go to mom, I need 100 rands or I need 200 rands, even when we have children of our own. So in humans, this is an extended parental care that goes on. Some of us are totally dependent on our parents till we die even. Not a good thing. You need to actually start looking after them at one stage. You start giving child care to your parents. What are the benefits? The benefit of no parental care is obviously that the organism can carry on mating and there's no energy and there's no time wasted on this parental care. Again, we cannot take this and fit it to human beings and say that's an advantage, that's why we don't want to take care of our young. When they look after the eggs, then eggs have protection from predators and from the harsh environment. They're keeping warm so the environment is not affecting them, and other organisms don't come and eat them up because they are being guarded by their parents. And once they guarded there and then they still being cared after they have hatched, etc., then there's a high chance of the offspring survival, because the offspring is learning from the parent. First of all, it's being fed by the parent until it gets more independent. And while it's being fed by the parent, it also learns important life skills. So when we're talking of life skills, it's not only for you and I. Life skills even animals need. How to hunt, how to run away from predators, how to catch prey, how to drink water, etc., etc., etc. So the organisms learn all that from their parents. So because they learn those skills, they have a higher degree of survival. Drawbacks, an easier word for that would be disadvantages or limitations. I put these words here because sometimes you get in an exam these words and then you get bamboozled. What are they talking about? So the drawbacks is, obviously if there's no parental care, there's a high level of mortality, and I would say high level of infant mortality. Why infant mortality? Because we're talking about the young that will be dying early because they're not getting any parental care. And in the disadvantage of care of that, you need energy, expenditure. So mortality, there's more mortality, there's less mortality after hatching in that case here. But there can also be mortality of the parent after that, because they're using up their energy and or they sacrifice even their own lives to care for the young. But remember, we can see that as a drawback. At the same time, it's an advantage. Why is it an advantage? Because the purpose of reproduction is to ensure survival of the species. If you have offspring, if the parent dies, the species will still continue because this offspring is going to carry on. It will find a mate, it will mate, and it will produce more of the same species. In fact, a survival strategy, which we're not discussing here, is altruism. I'm just going to write it down here, altruism. Now in humans, when we talk of altruistic human beings, we talk of those that do lots of things for other people. But in nature, when we talk of altruism, we are talking of where a parent will sacrifice its life for the offspring. Example of this is the blue crane. If the eggs of the blue crane are being attacked by a predator, the blue crane itself, the mother, will run away from the young. If the young are moving in one direction, the blue crane will run in an opposite direction, or if there's eggs, she will move and make a lot of noise and move in a direction. But while she's running, she will act as though she's injured, so that the predator would see her as easy prey and rather go for her. If she gets away, that's a double bonus, obviously, because then she and the offspring survived. But if she doesn't get away, the young have a chance to develop and to carry on with the species. That's what it is in that case there. Okay? In terms of the drawbacks of care of the young, obviously here, because it's not just looking after the eggs, you're going beyond that. So there's lots of energy required to go and hunt, etc., to find food for these young as they're growing. So may not be able to mate for many years after offspring birth. That means for many years thereafter, she's taking care of this young one till this young one can be independent, and therefore this particular organism will not be able to mate, so reproduction becomes slow. And also, she becomes vulnerable because she also has to look after these young, and while looking after and giving a lot of energy to the young, she herself may be exposed to the harsh environment and the predators around her. Examples, we've already discussed that. The fish, frogs, turtles, no parental care there. Here we have the seahorse, diamond python. The diamond python is a snake, obviously. The cephalopods, octopus, squid, spiders, etc. Remember, cephalopods are just the octopus and the squid, and the spider, arachnid. Spider is an arachnid, 8 legs. Here, obviously, you give yourself as an example. First, the humans, the primates, monkeys, chimpanzees, etc., all other mammals, emperor penguins, and the emus. These are some of the animals that will display a high degree of parental care after birth, while the young are developing. Now it's time for that part of the show where we want to test what we have discussed earlier. And it's a nice way to revise and consolidate what we have taken in. First question. Compare internal and external fertilization using the information provided in the table below. So this question in this exam or whatever test it is, they've given you a table. This question could have been asked differently. It could have just said tabulate then you would have to give your table and draw the table. Here it's given. Here in this particular case, they would have had 1.1.1 and 1.1.2, and you just have to list them and answer the questions. So what do they want to know? The difference between internal and external fertilization. That's what they want to know. Under which headings? Quantity of eggs and sperms, how many eggs and sperm, the chances of fertilization, and the energy required for this to occur. So we take 1 point at a time. We look at the quantity of eggs. And you know, when we were discussing the work earlier, I told you that for external fertilization, a drawback was slim chances of fertilization. So think of that when we're talking about this. So here we have fewer eggs and sperms. Why? Because the chances of fertilization are high. And therefore, this side, on the external fertilization side, it is more. Why? Because the more sperms and eggs that are released, at least some of them have a chance of fertilizing each other, or fusing with each other rather. The chance of fertilization, I've already alluded to that in a previous question. The chances of fertilization in, there's a mistake, definitely not. It's definitely not less, it is more in internal fertilization. It's a great, actually more is not a nice word. Greater chance, I would say, a greater chance of fertilization taking place, and I'm sure this would be wrong as well. This one here is wrong, obviously. This would be less chance. Let's unpack that. Why are we saying greater there and why are we saying less there? Greater would mean there is chances are higher. Why? Because the eggs and the sperm are inside the body. For them to meet, there's great chance. In fact, generally with internal fertilization, the egg and sperm are moving in opposite direction. So the chances of them meeting is very high. Okay? And in case of external fertilization, where are the eggs and sperm? They are deposited into the water. And when they are deposited into the water, nature takes its course thereafter. Whether this egg and sperm meet and fertilize is left entirely into the environment. If there's a strong current that separates them, sorry, no go, blanks. The sperms will be washed away one side, the eggs washed away the other way. Or if the eggs are deposited into the water and there comes this big predator, eats all the eggs up, chances are low. This does not show itself in internal fertilization. Good. Energy required, obviously for internal fertilization, there's more energy required because fusion is going to take place inside. You need energy for copulation to deposit the sperm into the body, one. And when this internal fertilization takes place, the developing embryo will start developing inside the body. It may not last forever in oviparous organisms, but it's still going to start developing, so there's energy required. And obviously, in external fertilization, the only energy is required is to deposit the sperm and the egg into the water. Thereafter, the parents have no obligation there. So that's what happens there. So that was a simple question. Now remember, we could also go into an essay type of question in this one here, where we could say, for example, let me write a question down for you. Compare internal and external fertilization and provide the advantages and disadvantages of each type of fertilization. A mini essay, 10 marks maybe. So one is you compare internal and external fertilization. In other words, we're going to use these same headings, but now we're not going to write it like in a table. We're going to talk about there's fewer eggs, blah. First of all, in this case here, we would also have to explain what internal fertilization is, what external fertilization is. Then we would talk about these facts here, of which there are 6 marks already. 2 marks each for explaining internal and external fertilization, that gives you 10. Then you must talk about the advantages of each. Let's say you give 2 advantages of each, that's 4 marks, that makes it 14. And the disadvantages of each type of fertilization, another 4 marks, 18. However, if you look at your exam guideline, you will notice that for this particular section, which section? The strategies that we are talking about. There's only about 6 marks altogether. So already you can discount that. It can't be an essay. However, it can be part of an essay. If they're talking about something else and they can include internal fertilization, for example, they talk of human reproduction. They give you an essay on human reproduction and they talk about that humans display internal fertilization. Explain what internal fertilization is and give its advantages, and something else that you have to talk about human reproduction. Explain how the embryo develops inside the body, because that you would have learned under reproduction. So those 2 can be put together. But remember, this whole section that we did now is worth 6 to 7 marks. Good. The next question, differentiate between precocial and altricial development and provide examples of each. Now here, you have to just explain them because you are differentiate. Differentiate, the verb means that you must explain what this one is and what that one is. And they said, another verb there, provide examples of each. So underlining your keywords, etc., has important value in this particular question. So the answer is obviously, in precocial, the young are born relatively mature and are able to move around after they are born or hatch. They are, you can say, relatively independent. Here too, if the mark allocation, you look at the mark allocation, there are only 4 marks, this explanation is sufficient. If we have to extend it to about 8 marks, then you need to go further here by precocial, talking about the hair, the fur, eyes, etc. You'll add to that. What do we mean by that? That those that have hair as the outer covering, they are covered with hair, and those are covered with fur or feathers in birds. And the eyes are open and they can see. In altricial, the young are unable to move at birth and generally helpless. Then you're going to say no body covering, and you can say that they are blind initially. So we're looking at 2 of those things there. Good. Draw a label diagram to illustrate a developing amniotic egg. Remember, I told you, you need to be able to draw. But look what we are saying here. We're not just saying of an amniotic egg, but a developing amniotic egg. Hence, we're looking at a little bit more complicated diagram. Again, parts of the diagram have been cut here. So in other words, you're going to have, what you're going to have here. First of all, let's do some skills on drawing, which we haven't used properly here. All diagrams must have a caption. So you're going to write here, amniotic egg. This can be at the top of the diagram or at the bottom. So you're going to get a mark for that one. Then you're going to actually draw the diagram. Now I'm going to just go down first to show you what you can't do. You can't do this because we don't have organisms or structures that look like that. All right. When you put your pen down, you must draw a solid line. That's what we mean. No sketching. The other one was a sketch. This is drawing. Okay? So there we have that one drawn there. And that would be the shell. And below that there's another one drawn there, and we will use another color there. I'm going over it to show you that you can draw the same thing. Obviously, I've got a guide with a diagram that's here. It makes it a little easier for me right now, but you can learn to draw the diagram as well. So the second one is the shell membrane. We could have left a space here, or the space is here, by the way. This line should have, but we're going to just take a little shortcut that way. So we leave this area here as the air space. Remember, the air space was there for shock absorbing. Okay. Then we go into the structure and we find these two structures here. One is, first, or three structures. One is the yolk sac. The yolk sac. Second one is the allantois. There we go, allantois. The third membrane is the brown one here. I'm going to have to use a different color there, obviously, onto this brown. There. That one there. Notice this one surrounds all, whatever the contents are. That is the chorion. So you're getting a clearer picture in this diagram about the different stories or the different structures that we find there. The allantois, again, stores the waste products. The chorion allows for the diffusion of gases and food, etc. The yolk sac provides the food. So in case they had to ask you to draw an annotated diagram, you would then write this, label these diagram, and next to it you're going to give the functions of each. Now when you are doing this, one is you have to have a caption, I told you. Two is you need solid lines. Three, your label lines must not cross. You notice if I drew shell membrane there, I can't now draw another line from here saying yolk sac. What's happening? The label lines are crossing there. So you cannot allow the label lines to cross in a diagram. Those three basic rules you need when you are drawing a diagram. One is it must have a caption. Two, the lines must be solid. And three, the label lines must not cross. There is no rule that says that you must label on the right or the left or the top or the bottom. You can label all around a diagram. But you must label without crossing lines. That's one. The fourth rule of drawing is that your drawing must look as a reasonable representation of what we're asking you to draw. If we're asking you to draw an egg, it must be a reasonable. Nobody's asking you to be an artist, that you must shade things and so on. Is not necessary. Unless the diagram tells you to shade something, you don't shade it. Or sorry, not the diagram, but the instruction. If the instruction tells you to shade, the diagram can't tell you anything. Okay, so those are certain basic rules. You have to develop. How do you develop the skill of drawing? You draw diagrams in your notebook from your textbook. You do not trace, but you draw diagrams, because in the exam, nobody's going to give you a textbook to draw from underneath it. So that's the drawing skill. So we've learned a drawing skill. We have also learned other skills there. Now, I'm going to give you one more skill while we're doing that. I'm going to tell you that we have fish, we have frogs, we have birds, and we have mammals. These organisms, we look at the number of offspring that they produce, each one. Here we have 1,000, here we have 1,000, here we have about 400, and here in the mammals we have about 100. Right. So we've given you a table in the exam, for example. Obviously the table is a name of organism and number of offspring. This, if we use other organisms, we could also change this to number of eggs instead of number of offspring. Now, what are the questions that we can get here? What type of question is this? This is an analysis question. Analysis means you're given data, you need to analyze the data. So some questions you can get straight from the table. You can say which organism produces the most offspring. Obviously, we look at the numbers, there we have it. Which organism produces the least eggs or the least offspring? You're going to come there. What is the difference between the number of offspring produced by the fish and mammals? Now what do? We have to do a calculation, but we have to analyze first. Look at the diagram. 1,000 minus 100, and it won't be so easy. I'm giving you this so that you can understand what to do in a table like this, equals to 900. Or they can make it a little bit more difficult. What is the difference between the organism that produces the second highest and the one that produces the least? Second highest is a bit of a tough one because 1,000, these are the highest. So the second highest would be that one, 400. So you had to choose which one to do. Now, for the theory, provide a trend shown in the graph, or in the table, sorry. So we will then say the trend shows that as one moves from fish towards mammals, the number of offsprings decreases. They can then ask you to plot this information on a bar graph. So you could do that on a bar graph. But more importantly, how is this linked to our work now? This trend that you showed, explain why this particular trend is shown in this particular information. Now what do you have to think about? What did we learn? We learned about internal fertilization, external fertilization. We learned about oviparous and viviparous, etc. And finally, we learned about precocial and altricial. We can tie all of that into this small table that we have here. How? We can talk about fish and frogs that have external fertilization. Therefore, they have to produce many offspring. Remember, it could be eggs or offspring in this case, to ensure that at least some of them survive. Why are we saying this? One is that they are laid in the water. So immediately when they hatch, they are prone to predators. There is no parental care. Can you see we're drawing from all the work we've done? There is no parental care. So these organisms are left to their own. They are mainly altricial. They are fending for themselves. So they can have that type of problem. As we go to the birds, we see already this has changed. It's gone up to gone less, sorry, to 400. Why? Because birds display internal fertilization, and they look after their eggs. They lay on the eggs, or they sit on the eggs to keep them warm, etc. And they have a degree of parental care after, until the birds can fly and fend for themselves. Coming down to mammals, and we could have made this a human or a monkey or a dog. Then we can talk about the fact that internal fertilization takes place, vivipary is taking place here, that the young is connected to the mother during the development, and therefore is receiving nourishment, protection, etc. from the mother. And when it is born, there is a high degree of parental care because the parent feeds the young, takes care of the young, protects the young, and teaches the young various skills that this young needs to carry out its life. So can you see, just from one small little table, the amount of questions that can tie up the entire section that we have just done. So don't think that our questions are going to be restricted to distinguish, tabulate the difference, discuss and describe these terminologies. But because of its nature, we can also use data to give you that. We could have changed this table to a graph and ask you the same questions based on what I just told you just now. So there's a wide array of questions that can be asked here. And this section links up to your next section, and that is human reproduction. And you need to see these two things together and how these factors that we're talking about, internal fertilization, vivipary, and precocial development, altricial development, parental care, how these things influence the development of human beings in human reproduction. You need to look at it on a broader scale. With that, I'm hoping that this work that we have done will help you to master the section. The duty on your side now is to find questions in your textbook, in your tests, on strategies, reproductive strategies. It will be called under another heading called vertebrate. It's called vertebrate reproduction in your textbooks. That's the heading. And we look at that. Please do not be fooled in reading too much, because things like metamorphosis, etc., are not in the syllabus anymore. It's only what we have discussed here. Those strategies are the only strategies that the CAPS curriculum requires. With that, I wish you well in what you do. Goodbye.